Thanks for joining us for another edition of The Small Business Show with Jim Fitzpatrick, exclusively on ASBN.com.
On today's show, we are discussing ways on how to stay productive and avoid burnout. Joining us now is Dr. Brynn Winegard, who is a keynote speaker, professor, and global expert in applied neuroscience. Dr. Brynn has been featured on BNN, Bloomberg, Profit Magazine, and more. Thanks so much, Dr. Brynn, for joining us on the show today.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So all of those great outlets that you've been on, and now you can say that you've been on our network. So that's all right. There you go. It's career highlight.
Yeah, absolutely. Highlight.
That's
sure.
right. So for those that might not be as familiar with your story as we are here at the show, tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, with pleasure. Thank you. So by trade and training, as you mentioned, I'm an academic and a professor. My research is in what we call applied neuroscience and positive psychology. But early in my research, what I found was baked into corporate lore and workplace narratives were brain myths that weren't just harmful, they were holding people back. And so I kind of went to work trying to figure out how to make sure that we busted some of those myths. And so now what I do as an entrepreneur, as a proprietor in my company, which is corporate training, is to try to dispel those myths in order to help professionals, entrepreneurs, business owners, be more successful in their lives by using their brains better. So really understanding, what it is they can do differently. And I spent 10 years in corporate life myself and now run a company. So I'm often not only my own guinea pig, but kind of have like a built-in barometer for whether or not the insights that research gleans are actually going to work.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing that. Productivity is crucial for everyone. What are some of the ways that you recommend for boosting productivity in a business setting?
Yeah. Oh, such a great question. So we used to think that the brain worked on the circadian rhythm, right? So circadian rhythm is a big word for light, dark, day, night, 24-hour cycle that your body actually works on. But we know that your brain works on the ultradian cycle. And the ultradian cycle is much shorter. So instead of being 24 hours long, it's actually about 90 minutes long to 120 minutes long. And we think shorter than that. Yeah. Now it has 4 phases. So I call them the climb, the peak, the fall, and the valley, just like any good wave would have. The idea there is that if you want to be more productive, you've got to, what I say, go with your flow, which is that if you find yourself really flagging and lagging behind and not able to think anymore, these diminishing marginal returns, you're probably in the fall. You need to take a break. So you need a lot more rest than you think that you do. If you find that you're in the peak and you're in the zone, you're loving it, everything's great, don't force yourself into breaks. Don't force yourself to leave what you're doing. Stay in that moment.
Okay.
So that's kind of the first, is to go with what we call your ultradian flow. Now, as you can imagine, when you wake up in the morning, your ultradian flow is working perfectly. But as the day goes on, we get tired. And your willpower, your stamina, your energy, your motivation, it all flags. And so you also want to go with your circadian flow, not just your ultradian rhythm. Your circadian flow is this, and I was my own guinea pig here, Jim, so I can tell you that this works. Here's how I've reorganized my day to go with my circadian flow, which is that in the morning, as a knowledge worker, I do my toughest lifting. So I eat the frog right in the morning, and it's usually my knowledge work. Then in that sort of first part of the day, I really dedicate myself to my one priority, which we'll probably talk more about. That one thing that I want to get done.
Right.
By the time noon hits, there's no more of that. I'm probably gassed, to be honest. Your willpower, your motivation, your energy, it's all flagged. And then after you eat lunch, of course, all your blood is in your gut. The afternoons are really good times for things like administration and meetings, emails, communication, creative work even. And then what I do, and it's in my calendar, is at 4 o'clock marks the end of my business day, I work out. That's when I do my exercise, is at the end of the day. And the reason for that is multiple, but it's basically because the neurohormones associated with working out, endorphins and cathalins, dopamine, serotonin, are then, much more easy to replenish at that point than they would have been perhaps earlier in the day. And I need them more than I did earlier in the day when I was fresh from sleep. And so I used my best brain on my knowledge work and used, my kind of brainless time when I'm already fried. That's when I do my physical work. And so the 2 ways, yeah.
That's fantastic. So you stick to that regimen each day?
Every day, Monday to Friday. Yeah.
That's fantastic. What do you do on the weekends? I mean, how do you calculate the weekends?
Yeah, well, so sometimes I like to do kind of like a rest day on a Wednesday and on a Sunday. So often on Saturdays we'll do something physical, but typically then in a social setting. So something with friends, something at the club, something where you are with other people,
Sure.
Socializing in a fun way, because then you activate something that we neuroscientists call cognitive play. And it is a state of mind similar to flow that is very magical, not just for creating, but for connecting with other people.
Sure. Now, you hear a lot of people talk about getting, they'll say, I'm burned out, or I can't go on. I'm done either for the day or maybe it's towards the end of the week, and they're just like, forget it. This is going to be a Monday thing. I'm not going to worry about it right now because I'm just burned out with everything that's going on, in my business. So what do you suggest for those people? What do you recommend for people that are dealing with burnout?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So clinical burnout is a medical condition, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have that, if you think you have that you are so physically, psychologically, mentally depleted that you aren't making your deadlines, you're missing things, you can't get up and go, you can't find that oomph, do consult your PCP. So that's the first thing.
Okay.
The second thing is, so we do want to make sure you're taking care of yourself. Now, most of us, especially that run a business or double timing things, there are a lot of obvious ways. You mostly know how to cope. So you know that you have emotional volatility, so you have to take care of yourself there. You know that those we call it compromised self-perception, but it's those inner narratives and monologues that start to be really unkind to your own self. You got to undo some of that. There's that neurochemical and hormonal depletion, right? Like you're starting to get cravings and you're exhausted and you can't explain it. So that's how you know that you're sort of in a state of burnout. There are a lot of ways that people don't know. And so this is kind of where it gets, for me, a little more interesting, because when I say this, people go, oh, I'm probably trending toward burnout and I had no idea.
Okay.
Your brain has these like cognitive coping mechanisms almost to protect you from knowing that you are in excessive stress states. Okay, so here are some of them. Procrastination is in fact a cognitive coping mechanism of overwhelm that is evidence that you're going toward burnout. Okay, so we can't hope to treat burnout subclinically if we don't know you're even in it. So if you start to notice you're doing a lot of procrastinating, you're probably in a state of pre-burnout. If you start to notice that you're being highly perfectionistic, or that like if something isn't perfect, it isn't finished, that's also evidence of coping strategies. Multitasking, which the brain actually doesn't multitask, it's code switching, also evidence. Things like self-handicapping, when you party the night before a really big stage performance or something like that. I mean, those are the types of things that we see. If you let distractions rule your world, if you let the unimportant but the urgent, those things of emails that suddenly come in and you think, oh, I'll just answer this, it'll only be 5 minutes. Actually, it'll take you about 15, and by the time you're done, you can't get to the big thing that you wanted to.
Sure.
Here's another one. If you start to notice that you have created a lot of clutter in your office, that's also evidence you are burning out. Or
I'm checking you've checked all the boxes, because I qualify for every single thing you've just said.
Oh, I doubt it, Jim. No, you're highly productive. Yeah, and your office looks great, at least from what I can see. But these are evidence. These are pieces of evidence that you are, trending toward that. And of course, some of the other, major ones. What do we say? Well, we now say that self-care is the new healthcare. My number one thing for people, if they're feeling like they're trending, I just said, this is everything I've got. I'm creating chaos. My office is a mess. I'm not meeting demands. Get more sleep. Start with sleep. That is where the brain heals itself, cleans itself, builds itself, rewires itself. Sleep is absolutely magical. No neuroscientist would tell you otherwise.
So, and everybody, is it still 8 hours? You should really shoot for that 8 hours of sleep, because I operate on about 6 hours of sleep, and if I get a good 6 hours of sleep, I'm like, I'm in. But my wife will tell me, you actually need 8 hours of sleep. Is she right?
Yeah, well, she is, and actually it follows on a normal curve. Humans do. So some people need kind of 6, some people need 10.
Okay.
Range. The median is 8 hours.
Okay.
Kind of where that number came from. Actually, where the 8-hour number came from was the Industrial Revolution, when they figured out that shift work should be 8 hours. And so the logic was you had 8 hours to work, 8 hours to be, your own full time and 8 hours to sleep.
Okay.
It doesn't quite look like that, but it's very close to that 8 hour.
Okay. Very interesting. Very interesting. What advice do you have for people to set realistic expectations for themselves while avoiding burnout?
Yeah. Oh, such a great one. I mean, we asked, so part of my research was asking people, what is the number one thing that is causing you to be upset in the office or, at work or with the people that you work with? And it was something called boundary transgressions. So it was when what they were doing was they were interacting with somebody, and it doesn't have to be direct reports or colleagues. It can be, supplier client relationships. But the idea that they had this boundary transgression, they had an expectation and it was violated. And so boundary transgressions are usually the result of expectancy violations, which is frankly that they expected something and they got something different. But here's the thing. When we asked people, did you A, know that was your expectation or boundary, and B, communicate it? The answer in both cases was no. So what we advocate, what we advocate is that you identify what your boundaries and expectations are. That usually takes some inner self-work. And then do what you can to communicate them a priori, because it's already too late if you're feeling that transgression having happened. So know and communicate your boundaries. That's the first thing. The second is, you've often heard these memes everywhere. No is a full sentence.
That's right.
You can say no. Yeah. And that's also standing up for yourself, right?
Yep.
That's saying, I can't be all things to all people. I can't be everywhere all at once.
Right.
This is especially for entrepreneurs so hard. Stay in your lane. Really pick, I sometimes call it the rule of one. What's the one thing that you want to get done or that you want to stand for? And really make sure that you do that, focus on that to all else. That takes discipline.
You bring up a very good point. Just focus on the one thing that you want to you have to get done today, right?
Yes, yeah. And what I often say is that the ideal circumstance is one where your to-do list is longer at the end of your day and it's complete than it was at the beginning. So it's less and you'll get more. And then you'll have this boost in neurochemical activity around happiness and satisfaction, getting it done, more serotonin, more dopamine. And then, you won't be berating yourself, which is that compromised self-perception stuff that we really want to try to avoid. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Dr. Brynn Winegard, keynote speaker, professor, and global expert in applied neuroscience. Now we know why she's so incredibly in demand and successful, because that was a really great tips that you shared with us. I mean, we appreciate it very much. Love to have you back, because I've got about 7 more questions here that time wouldn't allow us to ask today. But this is a great topic. So thank you so much for sharing all of this with us.
Thank you, Jim. So nice to see you. Anytime. Happy to come back.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of The Small Business Show with Jim Fitzpatrick, exclusively on ASBN.com.